I didn't ruin my life in a single decision. I let it slip away quietly. That's what makes it harder to explain. There was no scandal, no collapse, no moment where everything went wrong. If you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably say it was fine. Stable. Reasonable. Acceptable. And that was the problem. I didn't choose my life. I let it happen. I followed paths that were already there. Took opportunities that arrived without resistance. Said yes when it felt easier than explaining no. Said, maybe later, to anything that required courage. At the time, it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like patience. Like I was waiting for the right moment, the right version of myself, the right circumstances. I told myself I was being smart. I told myself I was being realistic. What I was actually doing was postponing responsibility for my own existence. Life has a way of rewarding that kind of passivity, at first. Things don't fall apart. You remain functional. You stay employed, connected, busy. People stop worrying about you because there's nothing obviously wrong. That's how years disappear. I remember thinking often, this isn't bad. But I almost never thought, this is right. The days blurred together in a way that felt strangely gentle. Nothing demanded everything from me. Nothing asked me to risk my sense of control. I became good at managing expectations, other people's and my own. I stopped expecting much. That felt like maturity. I learned how to tolerate dissatisfaction without naming it. How to fill time with routines. How to quiet that low internal voice that asked uncomfortable questions late at night. That voice never screamed. It waited. Sometimes it asked, is this it? Sometimes it asked, when do you start? Most of the time, I ignored it. Because ignoring it was easier than admitting I didn't know what I wanted badly enough to fight for it. I confused comfort with safety. Stability with meaning. I believed that if nothing was breaking, then nothing was wrong. But nothing was growing either. I watched other people make decisions that terrified me. They changed careers, ended relationships, moved cities, failed publicly, started again. I admired their courage from a distance and reassured myself that my path was simply different. Quieter. More controlled. I didn't realize control was costing me my life. The first crack appeared when something ended without ever truly beginning. An opportunity one had delayed too long. A conversation I had planned to have one day. A version of myself that aged out quietly while I wasn't paying attention. I told myself it didn't matter. But something shifted. I started feeling like I was arriving late to my own experiences. Like I was watching my life slightly behind the glass, always one step removed from full participation. I wasn't depressed. That's important. Depression would have been easier to explain. I was numb in a functional way. Engaged enough to perform, detached enough not to care deeply. My emotions stayed within a safe range where nothing overwhelmed me, including joy. I became reliable. Predictable. Invisible to myself. The most unsettling realization came one evening when I tried to imagine my future and felt nothing. No excitement. No fear. No urgency. Just a vague continuation of the present. That scared me more than uncertainty ever had. Because uncertainty means something is alive. This felt settled. Finished. I understood then that I hadn't chosen this life because I wanted it. I had chosen it because it required the least resistance. And resistance, I had learned, was something to avoid at all costs. I thought about all the times I had waited for clarity before acting. All the times I had said, I'll know when it's right. All the times I had mistaken hesitation for wisdom. Clarity never came. Only time did. And time doesn't pause while you wait to feel ready. It keeps going. Quietly. Patiently. Relentlessly. The thought that changed everything arrived without drama. What if this is my life because I never chose anything else? That question didn't accuse me. It exposed me. Because if that was true, then nothing had gone wrong. And that meant everything was my responsibility. I wasn't trapped. I was absent. And for the first time, I felt the weight of all the moments I had allowed to pass without asking myself whether I was actually living, or simply existing inside choices I never questioned. Once the thought settled in my mind, what if this is my life because I never chose anything else, I couldn't unthink it. It followed me through ordinary days. Through small talk. Through routines I had perfected. Through evenings that ended exactly the way they began. Nothing collapsed. But something inside me stopped cooperating. I began to see time differently. Not as something I had plenty of, but as something I had already spent without noticing. I looked back and realized how many decisions I had let default settings make for me. How often I had accepted what was offered simply because it didn't require a fight. I wasn't pushed into this life. I drifted into it. That realization hurt more than any external failure ever could. Because it meant there was no villain. No one to blame. No unfair circumstance I could point to and say, that's why I'm here. The reason was quieter. I had been afraid of choosing wrong. So I chose nothing. And nothing had shaped everything. I started remembering moments I had dismissed at the time. Invitations I declined because I was tired. Ideas I didn't pursue because I wasn't sure yet. Feelings I didn't express because the timing didn't feel right. I had believed that restraint made me wise. Now it felt like avoidance wearing a respectable mask. The internal breakdown didn't come as panic. It came as a slow, unsettling awareness that my emotional range had narrowed. I didn't feel intense sadness, but I didn't feel real excitement either. My life existed in the middle, where nothing hurts too much, and nothing matters enough to hurt. That middle ground had become my prison. I noticed how often I said, "It's fine." Not because it was good. Because it wasn't bad enough to justify change. I had learned to survive dissatisfaction without questioning why I was tolerating it. I realized how deeply I feared disruption. How much I valued being composed, reasonable, unproblematic. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. I didn't want to look foolish. I didn't want to discover that the risks I avoided might have been the only things capable of waking me up. Fear had taught me to be careful. Careful had taught me to be small. The moral dilemma became unavoidable. Do you continue living a life that works, even if it doesn't feel alive? Or do you risk everything you've built, stability, predictability, identity, for the possibility of something you can't guarantee will be better? Staying felt safe. Leaving felt irresponsible. At least, that's how I framed it. But safety without meaning is not safety. It's sedation. I understood then how easily people lose decades without catastrophe. Not through bad decisions, but through the absence of any real ones. Through a pattern of deferral so consistent it starts to feel like destiny. I had told myself I was waiting for clarity. But clarity had been waiting for me to move. I felt anger, not explosive, but sharp and precise. Anger at how politely I had erased myself. At how easily I had accepted a life that required so little of me. At how long I had confused low conflict with high quality. I also felt grief. Grief for the version of myself that used to imagine boldly. That believed life would eventually ask something significant of me. That didn't yet know how tempting it is to disappear into comfort. That version hadn't died. It had been starved. And starving something doesn't look dramatic. It looks responsible. Controlled. Mature. Until one day you realize it can no longer stand on its own. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years: if nothing changes, can I live the rest of my life like this? The answer came immediately. No. Not because the life was unbearable. But because it was unfinished. That answer terrified me. Because it meant change was no longer optional. Not changing would now be a conscious decision, and I could no longer pretend it was neutral. I understood then that starting late doesn't feel like a fresh beginning. It feels like interrupting yourself. It means admitting that you allowed too much to pass without resistance. It means accepting that acting now won't give you back what you lost, only what's left. That's a heavy thing to carry. I stood at that threshold for a long time. Not between success and failure, but between comfort and presence. Between continuing to let my life happen and risking the uncertainty of actually choosing it. I didn't feel ready. But readiness, I was beginning to understand, had never been the issue. The issue was courage. Not dramatic courage. Quiet courage. The kind that doesn't come with applause. The kind that begins when you admit to yourself that safety has become more frightening than risk. And once that admission is made, you can't return to not knowing. The moment I decided to stop letting my life happen didn't feel like freedom. It felt like grief. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that makes you collapse or cry uncontrollably. It was a slow, heavy awareness that whatever I chose next would confirm how long I had waited. There was no way to start living without also admitting how much of my life had already passed untouched. That was the price. I didn't quit everything overnight. I didn't run away. I didn't reinvent myself in a way that would look impressive in hindsight. I simply made one decision that I could no longer postpone. I chose to act without certainty. That alone felt reckless. For years, certainty had been my excuse. I told myself I needed clarity, confidence, proof that a choice would be worth it. I didn't want to waste my life on the wrong direction. The truth was harder to face. I had already wasted time by not choosing at all. So I acted badly at first. I hesitated. I overthought. I moved forward and then second-guessed myself. I made decisions that felt small compared to the years I had lost waiting for something bigger. And yet, something shifted immediately. Time felt different. When you're passive, time slips past you quietly. When you choose, time pushes back. It responds. It creates consequences. Days gain texture again. They stop blending into each other. Some consequences were uncomfortable. Some were disappointing. Some confirmed fears I had carried for years. But even disappointment felt more alive than comfort ever had. I realized something important then: living doesn't guarantee fulfillment. It guarantees contact. Contact with reality. Contact with limitation. Contact with the truth of who you are when excuses fall away. I wasn't extraordinary. That was one of the hardest things to accept. When you wait, you protect the fantasy that you might be. That potential remains untouched as long as you don't test it. Acting means discovering the real scale of your abilities, and your limits. I discovered both. And that humbled me. But it also grounded me in a way I had never felt before. I stopped imagining my life as something that would begin later. I stopped measuring myself against hypothetical futures. I started asking different questions. What am I doing today that requires my presence? What choice am I avoiding right now because it feels uncomfortable? What part of my life am I letting run on default because changing it would expose me? Those questions didn't always lead to big changes. Sometimes they led to small ones. But small choices accumulate faster than waiting ever did. I also felt regret more sharply than before. Acting didn't erase the years I had lost. It made them visible. Every step forward reminded me how long I had stayed still. I didn't try to reframe that regret. I let it hurt. Because regret is the cost of awareness. And awareness, painful as it is still better than sleepwalking. I understood then that the opposite of regret isn't success. It's agency. Being able to say, this is my life, because I chose it, even if it's imperfect. That changed how I related to everything. My work stopped being something that happened to me. My relationships stopped being something I maintained out of habit. My days stopped being something I endured. They became something I participated in. Some people didn't understand the changes. Some were confused. Some were quietly disappointed that I was no longer as predictable, as accommodating, as easy. I let that be. Because I finally understood that a life built to avoid discomfort eventually avoids meaning too. I still feel fear. That never went away. I still feel uncertainty. I still make choices without knowing how they'll turn out. I still mourn the time I lost waiting. But now, when I look at my life, I recognize it as mine. Not because it's impressive. Not because it's finished. But because I'm present inside it. If you're listening to this and you feel like your life is happening around you instead of with you, I want you to hear this clearly: you don't need a dramatic escape. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to feel ready. You only need to understand this one thing: waiting is not neutral. Every day you don't choose, something else chooses for you: habit, fear, comfort, time. I let my life happen instead of living it. And one day, quietly, without warning, I realized that passivity had been the most dangerous choice I ever made. Living didn't begin when everything made sense. It began when I stopped asking life for permission and accepted responsibility for being here, now, imperfectly, without guarantees. That was the moment my life finally stopped passing me by.